Hey guys, so we're just going to run through some key vocabulary words for this chapter. So please make sure that you fill out the definition. And if you want to give yourself an example as we go along, that would be helpful. So we're going to start with the word genetics. So genetics is the study of heredity and the variation we find within characteristics that are passed on from moms and dads. Okay. It's coded by the genes, which we learned when we learned about transcription and translation. We can make proteins based off of transcription translation, and then those can be passed on to our children. Okay, so here's just some generalized ones that you probably have seen before, which is like if you can roll your tongue or not, do you have attached or unattached earlobes, freckles, dimples in your chin. These are all just examples of things that you get from your parents and are passed on to you. Now, genes and alleles. So you have 2 copies of every gene because you have one from mom and one from dad. Okay, so an allele is the alternative form of the same gene. So we can inherit genes from our parents, one from mom and one from dad, but alleles mean that those genes aren't identical. They're slightly different. So if you're inheriting brown eyes from mom and blue eyes from dad, those would be the alleles. Okay, the gene is eye color, but the alleles is the actual one is brown, one is blue. Okay, so again, this is an example of what you get from mom and what you get from dad. They don't look identical to mom and dad, but they carry characteristics of mom and dad based on the different alleles that are passed down. So here is a vocab word that we are going to become, if not already, very familiar with, which is gene. It's essentially just part of your chromosome, which codes for a particular trait. So every chromosome can be replicated. We also know it can be transcribed, okay? Translated, then transcribed. Essentially, there's just sections of it that code for specific things that are found in your DNA. So you have a gene that tells you what hand you write with, either your right or your left. Now, again, here's that word of allele. All right, so allele is, again, a trait. Allele is an example of 2 opposite traits you could get, one from mom and one from dad. So you're either left-handed or you're right-handed. Okay, so the gene is your hand you're writing with. Your allele is your left or right-handed. Now we're going to talk about what is a dominant allele. And you may remember this from grade 9. And a dominant allele essentially is the gene that masks the effects of all other alleles. So we're going to use, in this case, an uppercase R. Whenever a dominant gene is written, it's written in the uppercase form. All right. So being right-handed is dominant to left hand. So we would represent that with the dominant letter uppercase R. A recessive allele is masked by other alleles. So the dominant allele masks the recessive allele. And because we're talking about the same gene, we have to use the same letter. So the recessive allele in this case is left-handed. Being left-handed is recessive to right-handed. But because we chose big R as our dominant gene, we can't change the letter because that would mean that we're changing the gene. And we're still talking about hands that you write with, okay? So we use lowercase letters to represent the recessive alleles. So lowercase r would represent left-handed. So the other types of words you're going to see are the words genotype. If you look at the root of that, gene, okay, is essentially what's inside of us, the genes that make us up. So if someone were to ask you your genotype, you're actually talking about the combinations of alleles inside of you. Again, they're represented by big letters and little letters. So big R would mean you're right-handed because it's 2 dominant alleles together. Big R, little r is a dominant and recessive allele. Dominant masks recessive, so you would also be right-handed in that case. Little r are both recessive alleles, okay, which would mean you're left-handed. All of those letters are examples of genotypes found in your body. So that's exactly what I just said. You could write it down as an example if you'd like. Another one is the phenotype, or the physical appearance of that trait. So genotype is what is inside your genes. Physical appearance is what we see. So we either see someone is right-handed or they're left-handed. Now, another important distinguishing factor here is when we talk about dominant and recessive, there are dominant traits can be two big letters or a big letter and a little letter. So we have to distinguish the difference between those. So when we call something homozygous dominant, we mean that it has two big letters. It shows both dominant traits. So big R, big R. Again, someone who has two big R's are going to be right-handed. Homozygous recessive is the same idea. Okay, it's explaining to you the genotype, but it's also telling you that the letters are the exact same. So because it's recessive, it has to be two little r's. So the person that would show homozygous recessive is showing a genotype that is little r, and they would show a phenotype that is left-handed. If they are heterozygous, okay, it's a combination of one dominant and one recessive. So again, think of root words. Homo means same. Okay, we saw that with homogeneous in grade 9 when we talk about homogeneous mixtures. Okay, hetero means different. Okay, so heterozygous means two different alleles being found in the genotype. We tend to call these people carriers, which means that they carry the recessive allele but demonstrate that they have the dominant allele as their phenotype. So an example of a heterozygous individual would be big R, little r. A person with this genotype would be right-handed, but again, they would be carriers of the recessive allele because they do have a little allele. So hopefully all that vocabulary you can get written down. You can rewatch this, pause, and start all over again. It's going to be very important because the language that we are going to use throughout this chapter is revolving around these words.